Welcome to the 5th World Congress of Medical Sexology. This Congress is sponsored by
Hi, my name is Dr. Fernando Bianco, and today we're going to be talking about the outcomes of MRI fusion cryoablation. This is a procedure that involves freezing of segments of the prostate gland guided through the MRI imaging in order to just destroy the areas where cancer is or tumor is and preserve the areas where the neurovascular bundles are. Therefore, you can preserve the erections and the ejaculations of the patients. What are the issues when it comes to prostate cancer? And basically, it's a pack of things that has happened throughout the years, right? One of the main issues is that it's diagnosed in 200,000 men in the United States, and it's the most common solid malignancy in the United States and Western Europe as a whole. And a lot of research has been performed on this topic. However, most of the papers until recently were just basically retrospective, case control studies, levels of evidence 3 and 4, so recently that we have randomized data and level 1's evidence. Next slide. So in the context of the natural history of the treated men with prostate cancer, there's several things that could affect outcomes. Number one, the first decision is whether you make intervention or not. In other words, there are many prostate cancer that can be observed or watched, and there are others that require treatment. When you treat, you're going to exert an effect. So that's the first part, which is this area, the clinical localized. You can watch it, you can treat it with surgery, treat it with radiation, or you treat it with new means. The second issue is that once you treat the cancer, you may solve the problem of the cancer for some time or forever. Some men will have recurrence signaled by PSA, and other men will have development of metastasis that has been observed. However, what changes again the tenor of the quality of life will be the initiation of hormonal deprivation, in which testosterone level will reach castrate levels, and that will kill certainly a large number of cells. However, that will evoke other responses of the patient, such as lack of libido, low stamina, memory problems. So that's part of the issues that that's one of the pivotal points when you go managing prostate cancer. The moment that these tumors continue to progress, then you need chemo, new forms of androgen deprivation, etc. Next slide. So going back to the going back into the randomized level 1 evidence, there has been now three randomized studies on screening, and one of the studies, and none of the studies really showed an impact on survival, other than a section in Sweden, in Gothenburg specifically, that showed differences in survival that were substantial to promote screening. Therefore, next slide, one of the problems that we had is that the United States Task Force decided to provide a D recommendation in which harm is greater than benefit. So one of the aims of our talk today is to show a technique that kind of takes care of those harms, and we can keep the benefit of screening. Next slide. Then we have the three randomized trials that looked at intervention versus observation in terms of prostate cancer. There were the Swedish trial, then the pivotal trial, which is prevention versus intervention versus observation in the United States, and then most recently United Kingdom, the PROTECT trial that compared actually active surveillance to surgery to radiation. In none of those trials we could see that there was a benefit that could be attributably significant to intervention. So there's some benefit from surgery and there's a mild benefit from radiation, but they're very weak. So the problem with this is that the intervention generates effects in quality of life, such as impotency, such as lack of ejaculation, or certainly urinary incontinence, and the harms outweigh the goods many times. Therefore, there's a high index of patient regret that occurs after this trials. Of the pivotal trial, this trial done in the United States with 700 men were accrued, of which 64% have died by the last of this latest report, which was early this year. We can see that the observation arm and the radical prostatectomy arm moving red respectively. You have a significant number of events, not a significant difference in the amount of death for any cause. The same happens when you look at cancer-specific survival. And the reason being is that a lot of those men who were initially managed with observation sometimes get other treatments. Among them is hormonal deprivation that prolongs life enough so you can live your life expectancy, and in those cases of observation perhaps have less adverse event profile. Next slide. A ton of studies have been done, and we did about the variation in outcomes that could be explained to the surgeon, that could be attributed to case selection, knowledge, surgical technique, certainly. So this things is just to show that the problem again with surgery is not the fact that the operation itself is quite a complex procedure, but however, the Bianco trial designed to evaluate the role of solifenacin, which is a medication and antispasmodic agent, in recovery of early continence after robotic prostatectomy. We provided the PDA device to the gentleman every time we removed the catheter. Then they started using it, and it will have several questions raised to them. Among them, how often do you use leak your urine, how many pads you urine a day, etc. At the end of the day, there was no significant difference between vested care versus placebo, but what we learned from this trial is that roughly by 3 months, about 73% of men will reach the endpoint of having social continence. That means that they were either using a pad that was dry because there were concerns it could leak, or that was completely dry. Next slide. And that led us to understand a lot about outcomes obtention from patients through this technologies, and we'll show you why. But before that, then we go into the traditional paradigm, which is basically patients who have been either you watch them and then you preserve continence, erections, and ejaculation, or you treat them and then you could have issues with continence, with erection, and certainly the lack of ejaculation. So, and in between, there's this big wide field between black and white that we didn't know what to do. And here's where it comes an interesting aspect. Next slide. So what we thought about and started a program 4 years ago was to try to understand how could we implement new technology that was allowing us to make better decisions in terms of better biopsies guided through MRI in the office. Now, use that information and then use cryotherapy, which is a mode of ablation, and ablate partial segments of the prostate gland and destroy the cancer lesions while we preserve the prostate function. Next slide. So under our paradigm, and which is what we call focalics, we look at clinical localized prostate cancer. We don't have to make a decision whether you do nothing or you treat the entire gland. We try to go into that gray area where we do our best to do a diagnosis guided on MRI imaging. Then we do a fusion biopsy, an MR fusion biopsy with ultrasound. And if the patient is eligible, then we can do treatment. And then we can just ablate those lesions. The main issue with this, or what we call MR fusion target management, is not novel in general. We do this in bladder cancer all the time. We do this in other tumors that we watch and intervene, and if needed, then you take care of the entire organ. This is with the premise of preserving quality of life. So in the paradigm is to keep a patient with erections, certainly if he has one, to keep his ejaculation, and in most patients will show you there's an improvement in urinary function. The key outcomes here will be conversion from this treatment to either surgery, radiation, or something more definitive that treats the entire gland, or the freedom from androgen deprivation therapy, as this is used most commonly before metastatic disease. Next slide. So when we look at the concept as a whole, one of the key issues is how do we control quality to make it reproducible? So one is in the acquisition of the MRI images. So that is one of the critical pivots. The second is the execution of the treatment that is guided on that MRI. And the third one really is the follow-up of these patients. And for that, we have developed an app that is patient-centered, where patients have and manage their own information, can contribute the information, and allows us, they actually authorize us to put data in their profile, let's put it that way. This is no different than having a Facebook page and then allowing others to just post something when you, they say, register at a restaurant or something like that. Next slide. So when we talk about MRI fusion, one of the biggest caveats is that there is several technologies that are involved. There's technologies to do the fusion, which is a specific software. There are several brands of ultrasound machines. There are several brands of cryoablation machines. So the bottom line is to blend all this together to make it easier for the urologist and the patient to receive this type of management. Next slide. So when we look at reproducible logistics, which is something that we want to accomplish to limit variability, we must have, number one, an MRI that meets standards of quality. Number two, we obtain this, then the patient brings us the CVE and we process, or it comes through the web, and then we do an outsourcing in order to process that biopsy or treatment plans. And then we focus on the plan execution. Therefore, really at the moment you're with the patient, you're really focusing on what you're going to do and not trying to recognize areas of interest or anything like that. Is already done. And this allows for standardization. The QOL data is acquired through the app via patient input. And it also allows for a flow of communication between the patient and his caring physician. Next slide. So at the end of the day, this is a 3D reformatic prostate that has an area of interest where the cancer was proven through a biopsy, and then it has another area which will be the safety area that we want to accomplish through the ice balls and basically destroy. And this is a man that, if done successfully, he will probably preserve his erection and his ejaculation, and he will probably have an improvement in flow as his urethra will expand and the cancer will be under control. Next slide. So this slide, we're going to show you now the technique and how the execution happens. The first aspect is to test the needles. So we test the needles, make sure that they're working and they're going to work inside the patient. Then we go into a perineal block, and we block the perineal superficially first, and then we do a dip infiltration. This is a method that I personally developed now over 3 years ago. As we do our deep infiltration, this allows us to do the procedure transperineally in the office. And this is critical, as they were performed usually in the operating room under general anesthesia before this. Then, using what we call the stepper and the software, we go ahead and do the stepper alignment, and we're doing, in this case, what's called a fixed registration or co-registration, in which we are adapting the ultrasound image to the MRI image, the MRI contouring that has the regions of interest, in this case, also the areas where we're going to put our targets, in this case, the needles or seeds and the rods. And as we do this, then, and we have a line, we go into the co-registration process, where when the stepper becomes some sort of a mouse in a computer, and then we can move through the prostate really without really making brisk movements, and the patient really can tolerate it without any significant pain. As we do this procedure and we finish our core registration, the next step is to advance those needles. And basically what we do is advance the needles into the targets. And this is how we accomplish this. We go ahead and you will see how we take a look at the core registered image in the sagittal plane, and we advance our needles. There's the urethra with the Foley in. So number one, we can establish an idea of our relationship between the needles and the Foley. On a very seldom occasion, we might need to adjust. And then we advance the needles through the grid, and we hit our targets like we're doing at that point. And basically, we can start doing that. And as we go through that processing, we advance several needles. That will be concluded, and then we'll start the freezing and thawing process. So right now we verify that our needle's on position. We're going to put another needle here. This one is bigger than the other one. This is called a rod. It creates a 4x2 centimeter lesion. The seat, which is on top, and this machine creates a 2x2 centimeter lesion destruction. And then we monitor the actual ablation of the prostate in real time. And this is one of the big advantages. If we had to do this on ultrasound, it gets distorted specifically after you go through the first freezing cycle. The fact that you have that layer of fuse of MRI in there gives you a lot of reassurance of where you are in that particular moment, or how you're treating this tumor and how you're destroying the actual lesion and preserving the rest. In this case, preserving the neurovascular bundles. You can see the curve of the ice ball right there. It's like a surf wave, basically, and you can see how they mount to each other and their relationship to the urethra. This is a transverse view of how the ice ball has destroyed the area of interest, and the neurovascular bundles are being spared. That allows us not to put any thermocouples or any unnecessarily probes, as the patients are happy when this is happening. It's happening in real time. They're having a conversation with us, or they're sleeping. And this is another example where we're destroying multiple tumors at the same time, which makes us different than other technologies. This is the before and after the lesion. We can see where the cancer was and where it's not anymore, how the diffusion weighted images change. This is a slide that shows the changes in the flow rates before and after. And again, all the information from the case in general is taken from the actual computer into the actual app. So again, the app doesn't affect decision making. It's not linked to any EHR. It's free to download from the App Store or the Google Play Store. Next slide. And this is what happens with the app. There's several screens. There's a patient-centered screen, a physician screen, and a department/institution screen. This provides several views. And the most important one is the patient screen, as he controls it on his phone, and basically you can know what's going on with his health history and keep a registry of that. Next slide. Just a series of views from the app that the app can be seen. You can download the app at focalix.com, and it's free to use. Next slide. So let's talk about a little bit of the results that we have so far. We started the program back in 2013. We registered a protocol under clinicaltrials.gov, and we have had, by the end of August of this year, 302 patients, in which 349 procedures have been performed. We can see the discrimination of the procedures. 247 of them have been what we call fusion-targeted procedures. Next slide. And the current results in them, I mean, you can see the median age has been 71 years, with interquartile ranges really between 63 and 81 or so. The PSA, most of the patients have PSAs under 10. And we can see that the median volume or mean volume of the prostate has been about 50 cc's. The treatment duration is about an hour for most patients. On occasion, there is some that may take a little bit longer. And in terms of risk groups, 36% have been what we call low risk. Most of the patients have been intermediate risk, but even 15% have been high risk. And these are older folks who still have erectile function and who want to preserve that function. And they have no burden of, let's say, at least an 8 or a PSA that's elevated over 20, and they're eligible for the procedure. Next slide. This is the Gleason scores on the clinical stage. About 70% of patients have non-palpable tumors, and another 30 have palpable tumors. And again, the Gleason, the vast majority of them is what we call a group 1, which is a Gleason 6. There's other patients beyond the other. Just over half will have groups 2 and 3. Those two big pies, and then the higher risk of usually represent less than 10% of the patients. Next slide. So out of those 247 men, it's interesting because we only needed warmers in 21 of them. These were men who have anterior lesions that were managed focally, and we put the warmers just to prevent any issues with the urethra. 30% of patients were discharged without a Foley. That has been decreased over time because there was about a 10% incidence of urinary retention overnight. So we tend to be a little bit more conservative, send them home with a Foley, come back the next day or in 2 days, and remove. The median follow-up right now is about 20 months. The median drop in PSA in 212 eligible men is about 5.2. All procedures were completed. 11% of patients have required a retreatment, and these are mostly men who were diagnosed with transrectal biopsies of the prostate that then were treated transperineally, and about 4% regarded conversion to surgery or radiation. From a functional outcomes perspective, 74% of patients have referred objective and subjective improvements in flow rates, with a median drop in the IPSS, or the International Prostate Symptom Score, from 11, which is moderate symptoms, to 4, which is normal. Median flow rates have increased by an average of 7 cc by second, and that's one of the most interesting things. By 3 months, 78% of erections, with 70% of patients referring that they have some ejaculation, and by 6 months, 86% erections, 75% preserve some kind of ejaculation. Next slide. Next slide. So there are some limitations, of course, to this data. It's part of an actively sought protocol that's scheduled to run no less than 20 years. This data that I'm presented is from our center in Miami. However, we have a center with about 100 patients now in Madrid, and we just started a program in New York City. We will serve, this data also will serve to be a premise to compare to other ablation therapies, and the key is that patients are closely surveilled through the Focalix app. Next slide, sorry. So in conclusion, MRI fusion target cryoablation is promising. It's office-based. It's done under local anesthesia, so you take away all those complications that are associated with regional or general anesthesia. There's no harm seen other than a few retention in patients. There's improvement in urinary function and preservation of prostate function, in this case ejaculation and erections. Ecological control seems promising, and we have an adequate way to control their follow-up over time. So next slide. We want to thank you very much for your attention on this. Here's my email where I could be reached, and we'll be happy to answer any specific questions. Thank you.
Welcome to the 5th World Congress of Medical Sexology. This Congress is sponsored by